Hey everybody, welcome to Tip of the Spear. This week we have a great guest, Dr. Bill Salus with us, and he's going to be talking about the Middle East, he's going to be talking about Iran and all kinds of geopolitical aspects that are going on over there and the prophetic significance of those types of events that the Bible predicts is going to happen and how things are setting up that way. A little bit about Bill, if you don't know Bill Salus, and I'm shocked if you don't know Bill Salus, but he is an expert on deciphering prophetic significance of current events in the Middle East and globally, and showing us how those dots connect to prophecy. He's gained a lot of recognition through his books. Bill, I think, has written, 11 books so far or something like that. He's been featured on Christian television networks like TBN, Daystar, CBN. He writes freelance. He has a lot of articles that have appeared on publications as WorldNet Daily, The Christian Post, as well as other platforms that Bill finds himself on. And again, he is sought after for interviews, both radio and TV, and obviously we sought after him because we want his insight on what's going on in Iran. And anyway, a lot of his journey was sparked by the attack on September 11th, 2001. That's what got him into the area of study, and now he's one of the leading experts in our field, and that's why we're privileged to have Bill Salus. Bill, thanks for coming and being on the program. It's great to have you, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me on the program. Hey, by the way, that background you got, that map of the Middle East, is spectacular, especially in light of the topics we'll be discussing today.
Yeah, right? A lot going on there, right? So, hey, Bill, your latest book and your DVD, and people can get it, it's called The Future War Prophecies, and it delves into various conflicts outlined in Bible prophecy. It locates the battlefields, identifies the participants, motives behind everything, provides details and the outcomes of all that the Bible is predicting that's going to happen in this Middle East conflict. And what I want to talk to you about, because you've been really drilling down on Iran, and we know that Iran is the subject of two end-time prophecies in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and then obviously with the prophecy of Elam found in Jeremiah 49. Can you brief everybody just briefly on the significance of Iran for prophecy?
Well, right. Iran has double trouble in the end times, the subject of the dual prophecies you talked about. One of them, of course, very familiar with probably most of your audience, would be Ezekiel's prophecy. Yeah. Ezekiel 38 and verse 5, they're listed under the banner of Persia. Now, when you look at a modern-day map of Iran, it is comprised of ancient Elam and modern-day Persia. Elam, of course, hugs the Persian Gulf on the southwestern side of modern-day Iran. It is also the subject of a prophecy written by Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah wrote his prophecy on Elam in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, around 596 BC. And his contemporary Ezekiel, about 20 years later, wrote another prophecy about Persia in Ezekiel 38. So these are two powerful prophecies. Both prophecies use the same words. They happen in the latter years. So these are end times prophecies in both cases.
Yeah. So in light of that, we all understand that Israel is facing enemies on like 7 fronts, Bill, with proxies that are funded and controlled by Iran or Elam or Persia is the biblical name. And we see Hamas was funded. We see that the Houthis in the Red Sea that are blocking the Red Sea by Iran. We see that Hezbollah in the north is funded and supplied by Iran. So it appears, Bill, that Iran's behind a lot of what's going on in coming against Israel. That being the case, what does the Bible say about what will happen to Iran and what will happen to Persia and Elam? What is the end game for them?
Well, it's interesting. The Elam prophecy, which I do believe would precede Ezekiel 38,
okay.
It talks about in these 6 verses. It's really pretty easy to summarize. I've written a book on it called Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam. I also incorporated this prophecy in the Future War Prophecies book that you mentioned at the onset of the program. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty easy to summarize this prophecy in a short order. I'll do the Reader's Digest.
Yeah, go for it.
there's going to be a disaster in the territory that hugs the Persian Gulf over there. It says that the Lord becomes fiercely angry at some point with the leaders of Elam, or Iran in this case.
Yeah.
And we say, well, how do we know that? It says because he says he's going to destroy from there. In fact, I'll read this first because it may come up when we talk about Raisi's death.
Yes, we want to talk about that.
It says in Jeremiah 49, verse 38, and I'm going to talk about the prophecy in general, but this is a key verse here, maybe relative to Raisi's recent death in the helicopter, the president of Iran.
Yeah.
It says, I will establish my sovereignty over Elam, and I will destroy there the king and their leaders, says the Lord. And the point is, what he's saying, what's happening there is that there's bad leadership. You would not destroy good leaders, but for some reason, the Lord feels the need to destroy them. They're fiercely angering him, we're told in the prophecy. How do we know that? Because they want to launch something lethal somewhere, because the Lord says to Jeremiah, I will break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might. And that would be, in modern day vernacular, that'd be their missile launching capabilities. Now, on April 13th, they sent over 320, drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles over into Israel, and we call those arrows in the Old Testament vernacular. They sent over about 320 arrows. About 99% of those were intercepted, but the bows that shot those were not broken. And those bows, by the way, those missile launchers, they have underground missile silos. They have portable rocket launchers. They have an underground air base. They're all mostly stationed in this territory of Elam, so they become a very strategic target for Israel or any other enemy to attack in the event of a war. Now, it says that they want to launch something lethal somewhere. The Lord won't allow that to happen. He's fiercely angry with the leaders. And he says he's going to break the bow at the foremost of their might. Foremost of their might may likely be associated with their nuclear weapon potential, which at this point, some of us suspect Iran, if they don't have it already, they probably have soon to happen about 5 explosive-ready nuclear weapons that they could put on, they could launch onto their hypersonic ballistic missile, which they have. Which can get to Israel in 400 seconds, which is 6.66 minutes. The point is that they want to launch something lethal somewhere, and the Lord won't allow that to happen. That somewhere will probably be Israel. We're not told where. Yeah. But of course, we know they want to wipe Israel off the map. Yeah. And it says when this happens, a disaster is created in that specific geographical area by the Persian Gulf on Iran. And it says the Lord will bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and says he will scatter the indigenous population, the Iranians, into all those winds. And it says there'll be no nations, plural, where the outcasts will not go. So it sounds like a humanitarian crisis is sparked from this disaster. Sounds nuclear, radioactive. And then it goes on to talk about that the Lord will pursue them with consume them with the sword, which tends to be a military idiom for war. And it says, and Elam or Iran will be dismayed before their enemies, plural. So that means that at the time this happens, they will have a menu of enemies. Well, they have Israel, who attacked them on April 19th and got into that. Isfahan shot their drone over there. Yeah. Of course, America is concerned with what's going on with what they're doing with the Houthis. Iran has threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz if they're attacked. Yeah. That will certainly ruffle the feathers of the UK and America and other world countries. Some of the Sunni Arab countries like Saudi Arabia are very concerned about Iran. So the point being, they have a menu of enemies present at this time. And he goes on to say, I will destroy from their king and their leaders, as I quoted. So that's a summary of the bad news for the prophecy. There's some good news. It says at the end, the Lord will set his throne in Elam, and he will restore from there the captives, restore their fortunes. Of course, that would be those people who get scattered as a result of the disaster. I see. They would go through the tribulation period, and those who survive and become believers, which would be very difficult to do after, as we know, the tribulation period is a lot of martyrdom, but they would become sheep Gentiles, and he would restore them as a remnant, restore their fortunes back to, so there'll be Iranians in the Messianic kingdom, as there will be Israelis, Jews, there'll be Assyrians, there'll be Egyptians, there'll be Jordanians, and of course many other nationalities will be in the Messianic kingdom. So that's the Reader's Digest version of that prophecy. And of course, we know Iran's got its octopus tentacles scattered throughout the Middle East with its proxies of Hezbollah,
Sure.
Hamas, Shia militias in Iraq, the Assad regime in Syria. The
Yeah.
Houthis are acting up big time now down there, and tested a solid fuel missile just recently. The reason that's important to watch is because solid fuel missiles versus liquid fuel missiles, they can be launched quicker because
Oh, really?
the Houthis are concerned that they launched a liquid fuel missile, and the America, will, of course, or Israel would see where they launched it from
Yeah.
and destroy it quickly. This way, if they can do a solid fuel missile, I found this interesting. It's just out in the news today.
Huh.
They can try to disguise where they're launching it from and get it out of there quickly because of course, the satellite technologies now. We can find out where they're launching them from.
Yeah. Wow. So, hey, Bill, you know, in regards to Iran, and we just had the sudden death of the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, die in a helicopter crash, right? And you've been mentioning on other interviews a possible connection with this prophecy of Elam. Can you help our audience bridge the gap between his sudden death in that helicopter crash with prophecy?
Well, I read you Jeremiah 49 verses 38. The Lord will destroy from there the kings and the leaders, and that may have a connection. Now, I'm not saying it does. It's hard to say that's a literal fulfillment of that verse. But as I said before we went on the show, it's certainly a good segue into the prophecy that we just talked about. But, you know, there's other potential parallels with Raisi and his death. You know, one is he was a strong endorser of the missile attack on April 13th of the 320 missiles. And through the sky, these missiles were sent out. And they really didn't attempt to do much harm and damage to Israel. Fortunately, not a lot of damage was done because 99% of them, as we said, were intercepted. But in a twist of fate, and so he wanted to destroy Israel through the air, but in a twist of fate, he gets destroyed with several of his other crew members and another foreign minister, a key player.
Yeah,
they get destroyed in the air. And I find that is possibly a curse for curse and kind connection out of God's foreign policy, is Genesis 12:3 playbook, where it says 4,000 years ago, God established his foreign policy to the Gentiles, which says, if you'll bless Abraham, you'll be blessed, but if you curse Abraham, you'll be cursed. And that extrapolates on through Isaac, his son, Jacob, his grandson, on into the Jews today.
Yeah.
And there's examples in time where people tried to curse the Jewish people. Like, for instance, you know, Pharaoh tried to kill the firstborn males, and of course, in the plague retaliation, curse for curse and kind, Pharaoh's firstborn were killed in one of the plagues. Pharaoh tried to destroy the Hebrews and kill them at the Red Sea, but the Red Sea parted, and of course, Pharaoh went through with his armies. The Red Seas converged, and they destroyed Pharaoh at the Red Sea. Another example would be Haman, who might find some connections here with the hanging Judge Raisi. We might get into that in a second, but
yeah, that would be good.
Haman wanted to have Mordecai hung in the gallows. Mordecai was a Jew back at the time of Esther, and Haman got hung in the gallows, curse for curse and kind. We're going to find, I write about this in the Future War Prophecies book, we're going to find that the curse for kind clause comes out very strong in the future wars with Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The Arabs want to destroy Israel militarily, but the Israeli Defense Forces will win victories militarily. Curse for curse and kind. So here comes Raisi, wants to wipe Israel off the map, and he's threatened on several occasions to do that. And he even said recently in Al Jazeera News that if we attack Iran, we will raise or attack Tel Aviv and Haifa. So he's very vocal about his intentions. So he wants to destroy through the sky, the missiles in the sky, and in a twist of fate, of course, he gets taken out in the sky. His helicopter essentially becomes a missile that destroys him. So I just find these things very interesting. There may be a foreign policy issue here, and this may be leading into a segue into the Jeremiah 49 prophecy we just talked about.
Sure. You know, that's interesting, Bill, that you mentioned that the curse for curse of God's foreign policy with the Abrahamic covenant. Our colleague, Bill Koenig, has written a whole book on that, Eye to Eye, that chronicles that every time the United States does something negative to Israel, divides its land or whatever, then something in kind happens to us as Americans. And here's what the scary part, I want to get your take on this. We're starting to see daylight right now between the United States' alliance with Israel and the Biden administration telling Israel, hey, you're going to fight this war the way we want it, otherwise we're not going to supply missiles to you. Where you're going to allow basically Hamas to survive, and you're going to create a two-state solution. Explain to our audience the significance of that prophetically, along with this cursing aspect. If America continues to turn its back on Israel, or basically has them over a barrel, explain to people what can happen to the United States.
I agree, and Bill Koenig, his book is excellent. He's a good friend of mine, and I've, of course, read his book and recommend it. The concern would be for America, in my estimation, we're sort of on our last straw with God. I think we've been experiencing abandonment and wrath out of Romans chapter 1 for quite some time.
Yeah,
we've been given over to those three things: the lust of the flesh and moral depravity and homosexuality, the things that God abhors.
Yeah.
We, over the last 60 to 70 years, have, through Supreme Court decisions, the laws of the land have said goodbye to God. We took them out of the classrooms, and Bibles no longer in the schools in the 60s. We took the Ten Commandments came out. We had Roe versus Wade in 1973 with legalizing abortions.
Yeah.
We had in 2013, we couldn't defend the DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, where one man can be married to one woman,
right,
which is biblical, but we can't defend the constitutionality of that. And then then you can redefine marriage then, of course, and that's when you got the Overveld versus Hodges Supreme Court case during Obama's administration in 2015. That when that decision came out, of course, he lit the White House up in rainbow-colored lights. So now that approved homosexuality. So we pretty much straight-armed God. We said, we don't need you in our classrooms with our kids. We don't need your 10 Commandments up at our public places.
Yeah.
We don't value life. We'll kill babies. We don't value the sanctity of marriage. We did, of course, try to help Israel and support them through the years. But if we pull that away, especially at a time right now where God is for Israel, he's brought them back in the land.
Yeah.
He's going to do many things through them. And all of a sudden we start becoming a thorn in Israel's side. Basically, America, in my estimation, along with much of the international community, has become another one of Iran's proxies.
Good point.
So at this point, basically, the kind of phased war that Iran's conducting with Hamas first, Hezbollah is going to start. You watch, they're going to start ratcheting up real soon into a massive war.
Sure.
That'll bring in Syria, Bashar al-Assad as well with his chemical weapons. Meanwhile, the sort of skirmishes going across the northern border, although they're increasing, have enabled the international community to continue to have its anti-Semitism fester toward Israel.
Yeah.
And gain momentum. That all works in the favor of Hamas and Iran and their proxies.
Yeah. Explain that a little bit, because what we're seeing is quite shocking, the rise of anti-Semitism. But we got the International Court of Justice basically trying to accuse Netanyahu and some of his cabinet, and even indicting the IDF of war crimes. Are you shocked that you see this level of anti-Semitism? Because I don't know about you, Bill, but I don't understand how Israel gets thrown under the bus when it's Hamas that attacked them, and then all of a sudden they're the bad guy, and they're equating Netanyahu with Hamas leaders. I mean, are you shocked by this? What's spiritually happening?
Well, in my study of prophecy since 2008, when my first book came out, I realized that the world leaders are clueless. They're oblivious. They have no idea what God's plans are. Right. Anti-Semitism is going to continue to grow because ultimately the main anti-Semite, the Antichrist, is going to come on the scene, and he's going to try to commit a final genocide of the Jews at the mid part of the tribulation. So, the track record with the United Nations and the international community has been very anti-Semitic ever since the rebirth of the nation of Israel. The ICC, trying to put these criminal charges together, first of all, the ICC function is mainly for countries that don't have a very good or don't have a judicial system, so they sort of step in and intervene. They've got no business trying to put criminal charges against a state like Israel.
Yeah.
And especially to put them on an even level of crimes with Hamas, which
Right.
of course violated every protocol, every war protocol there is on October 7th. Israel, of course, is living by these protocols. They're trying to fight the kind of war that is as clean as possible, although war cannot be clean. They're considered that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, it's just I'm not really surprised, to be honest with you, Brandon, because I see it's going to increase, and it's already been had a track record for, since Israel become a nation.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, so guys, here's what I want to tell you. Bill Salus, I got to introduce Bill Salus early. When did you come out with Israelistine? What year was that?
My first book came out in 2008, and it dealt with the Psalm 83 prophecy, and it got people like Chuck Missler and Hal Lindsey and Dr. David Reagan.
Yeah.
And Tom Hughes and others talking about the prophecy. It had been vastly overlooked.
Yes.
That was my first book in 2008.
Yes. So what I want to tell people is now it's under the new title Psalm 83, right? And I want to tell people, get that book, because I subscribe to your scenario, Bill. I think what you did with Psalm 83 was cutting edge. And explain to people the scenario that Psalm 83 will happen prior to Gog of Magog, and why. Yes.
And the book, by the way, was upgraded from Israelistine in 2012, I think it was, because that was after the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
And it enabled me to do an update on the Psalm 83 prophecy and answer a bunch of the objections. There were a lot of people who came out and said, no, this is just a prayer, or it's already been fulfilled. But the point is, nobody was talking about it until 2008. So fortunately,
That's right.
we provoked the audience to start paying attention.
Yeah.
And but basically, Psalm 83 is written 3,000 years ago by Asaph, who was a prophet, but he's also one of King David's worship leaders. Mm-hmm. And he talks about this attempt of the Arab countries around Israel that share common borders with Israel. He speaks of them in their ancient names: Edomites, Ammonites, Moabites, Gigabites, Termites.
Right.
Those types of things.
Right.
Of course, they had termites, but they didn't have gigabytes back then. Right? So they're going to come together and form a crafty, devious plan, a confederacy. Then we're told they want to come together and destroy the nation of Israel, and that the name of Israel would be remembered no more. That's verses 1-5. And then goes to 6-8 and identifies these belligerents. And they form an inner circle of countries and terrorist populations within those countries that share common borders with Israel, which would include Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, Palestinians, of course, the Hamas in the Gaza area, ancient Philistia. Yeah. The Saudis would be in there as well, and the Palestinians in general. And, of course, a lot of these people came against Israel in 1948, which caused some people to say this was a fulfilled prophecy back in 1948, which two comments I have on that. If it was, then how come no one was talking about it until I came out in 2000?
Exactly.
And two, it didn't fulfill the entire 18 verses because Asaph petitions God to deal with them, empower the Israeli Defense Forces as examples of the book of Judges, like with Gideon and the Midianites and Deborah and the Canaanites, until there's a sound defeat and no more oppression by those populations. And that hasn't happened yet, and that they would know that God of the Bible is one true God. That's also part of the prophecy.
Right.
So, but what happens is that's why Israel has had to build walls and border walls and the partition fence for 403-mile partition wall inside of Israel proper to keep Palestinian terror out.
Yeah.
And those walls have to come down before Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38 is a massive prophecy where God brings Russia, Turkey, Iran, and a coalition of 9 members who come to invade Israel in the latter days for plunder and booty. But the prerequisites for that to happen, there's a few preconditions. Israel has to be brought back in the land. Okay, give that a check mark.
Yeah.
They got to be dwelling safely, securely, without walls, bars, nor gates, and receive of great plunder and booty. Now, Israel is not dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates. They got border walls along all of its fences, several big ones up on the border of Lebanon,
Yeah.
They've got them down around the Gaza. They've even got walls with Egypt, down by the Sinai. Even Jordan, they have a wall over there. They're not dwelling securely because they can't.
Yeah.
That's why I put Psalm 83 first. So when Psalm 83 happens, several things can happen. They can dwell securely. They can tear down the walls. They won't feel the need for them anymore.
Yeah.
They'll invite more aliyah.
Yeah.
More Jews would come to there. They can annex territory. There's several
Yes.
verses that talk about them taking over portions of Jordan
Yes.
and parts of southern Lebanon. These are parts of the promised land. More Jews will come over. The more there'll be more resources they can exploit and develop. And Israel finds itself temporarily dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, and receiving great plunder and booty, of which Russia then says, okay, let's go get that with its predominantly Muslim coalition. Those Muslims will be furious with Israel because of what they do in the Psalm 83 victory.
Sure.
So that, to me, it's a 1-2 punch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Psalm 83 has to happen. That's an inner circle of countries. Ezekiel 38 is an outer ring of countries. None of them share common borders with Israel. And
Right.
Ezekiel does not list them. I think he intentionally omits them. He's aware of all those Psalm 83 countries. He mentions them over 86 times in his 48 chapters. But he doesn't mention them once in Ezekiel 38, but he's very specific about who he does mention. So he's not like missing things. He's like intentionally omitting things, in my estimation. Now, these Ezekiel 38 invaders, Magog invaders, have never really had a hatred toward Israel throughout the years, the centuries, as has been the case with the Arabs in Psalm 83. They've harbored an ancient hatred, time immemorial. So now there will come a time, though, where those countries in Ezekiel 38 will hate Israel and they'll come after them. And we already see Iran is starting to hate them, and Iran is part of that. Sure. So Iran will survive the Elam prophecy, but they will. Maybe one of the reasons I point this out, and maybe one of the reasons Elam is just sort of Persia is given an honorable mention in Ezekiel 38 verse 5. It talks about Gog of Magog and Meshech and Tubal, and then you get down to Libya and Ethiopia, and then they throw in Persia, which is Iran. So it may be that, and I'm not trying to make a big deal out of that, but maybe Iran is not the same Iran we know today after the Elam prophecy and the disaster comes together with Russia and its coalition in Ezekiel 38.
Man, wow, that's great. Great insight. Hey, real quick, Bill, because I got about 2 minutes left. The Gog of Magog war, and then you have the Psalm 83 invasion. Are these pre-tribulational events?
I believe they are. The Israeli Defense Forces are cornerstone in the Psalm 83 war. They are winning their enemies. The Israeli Defense Forces will not be fighting in the tribulation because in the first half they are dwelling in a peace because of the false covenant gets created. The Antichrist confirms. They're so complacent they can't even stop the Antichrist at the mid part of the trib from going in and abominating the temple.
Sure.
They won't be fighting in the second half of the tribulation because they'll be fleeing for their lives from the genocidal attempt of the Antichrist at the mid part of the tribulation. And I believe the Ezekiel 38 battle is pre-tribulation also for numerous reasons. One of the ones most of us guys would be talking about is they'll be converting the weapons of the enemies into fuel for 7 years. And in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, they could do that because they're living at peace and they could use those weapons for fuel. But in the second half of the tribulation, there will be, if anything, grabbing them to defend themselves as they flee. So they wouldn't necessarily be burning the weapons, but they could burn them 3.5 years before the tribulation. 3.5 years in the first half of the tribulation. So that's why most of us would say it's a pre-tribulation event because of that one clue. But there's more clues too, Brandon.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. No, I agree with you on that one. Hey, real quick, where do you place the destruction of Damascus? Where is that Psalm 83? You placed it in Gog or Magog. Where do you place it?
Well, Damascus isn't technically part of Psalm 83. It's not listed there. It was of the ancient territory of Aram, A-R-A-M. So I think it's an independent prophecy, but I think it works kind of in tandem. So I would put Damascus, I would say, here's my sequence of events. The Elam prophecy, Damascus will probably get destroyed first as Iran calls on its proxies to come against Israel. Then I think ultimately the Elam prophecy will happen, Jeremiah 49. I think when that happens, and the process, the Psalm 83 countries see that Israel takes a hit according to Isaiah 17 verses 4 through 6. They take a hit, and I think the Arab countries at that point say, look, they just took out, Israel takes out Damascus, by the way, says the desolation in Isaiah 17:9 is caused by the children of Israel.
Okay.
And the Arab countries are going to go, wow, Israel just probably pulled out a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Look out
Yeah.
Damascus, because that happens overnight, according to Isaiah 17, verse 14. One night
Right.
you see him, in the morning he is no more.
Yeah.
And the Arab countries go, Israel's hurt. They're taking out Arab cities. And Amman, Jordan goes next, by the way.
Okay.
Jeremiah 49:2 says there's a war of alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites, that's the capital of Jordan, Amman. And it shall be a desolate mound, and Israel will take possession of its inheritance, Jeremiah 49, verse 2. So Damascus goes down, and not too far away, Amman, Jordan goes down, becomes a desolate mound. And I think the Arab countries get involved in Psalm 83 at that point, going, they're going to take out our cities.
Sure.
What's to stop them? And we can get them now. They've been hurt.
Yeah.
And probably in that proxy war with Iran. So I'm looking at Damascus, Elam, Psalm 83, then Ezekiel 38.
Okay.
And somewhere in the mix, the most important of all prophecies, Christ is going to come get his bride to the church.
Amen. 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 That's good news to end on. That's great. Bill, man, I could go on forever. I love it, man. You have great detail, great insight. If people don't know about your ministry, how do they find you? Where are you located at on the internet?
We're at prophecydepot.com, Prophecy Depot, like homedepot.com. And we've got a online bookstore with my books and DVDs. Got my articles. You can connect to our YouTube channel. We got lots of YouTube videos that we do. And so it's prophecydepot.com. And we also have a daily news site we do called Prophecy Headlines. And a brain freezer. Prophecyheadlines.com. And you can also get there from our website, prophecyheadlines.com.
Perfect. Yeah, and you're going to be joining us in our September conference in Woodland Hills, and we're going to be talking about the geopolitical implications of this 2024 election, and getting your insight and many other people's, like Tom and Alex Newman and other guys. So thank you for joining us on that conference. So guys, tune into that. More details are going to be coming about that conference, as you can attend in person or you can stream online. Should be a great event, and Bill's going to be there. Bill, I got to get running. I have out of time, my friend, but thank you so much for all the work you do, Bill. We all appreciate it. And man, you are connecting dots like no one else, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandon. It was great to be on your program.
You betcha, man. All right, guys, join us next week as we bring in another voice of leadership in the prophetic world and the biblical world, as we try to discern the signs of the times and what's going on, with the Lord and His program, whether it's dealing with Israel or dealing with the church or dealing with all the geopolitical things we talked about today in the Middle East. Join us next time, and God bless you. Keep watching on the wall.